Good day, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Automate SOX PCI Breach Detection with UCMDB-CM. My name is Stephanie Concoy, and I am the Vivid Americas Chapter and SIG Liaison and a Marketing Liaison. Next slide, please. Today's webinar is brought to you by the Vivid HP Configuration Management System Special Interest Group led by Evan Hamilton and Patrick Wolf. Next slide, please. Evan Hamilton will be moderating the questions today and will be your host as we kick the webinar off. And Evan is not only the Configuration Management System SIG leader, he's also the VP of Services for CraveTech. Next slide, please. Today's presenters are Brian Wong and Justin Harrison. Brian is the practice lead for enterprise security with Configure Consulting, and Justin is a technical consultant with HP ITPS with configuration consulting as well. Next slide, please. Okay, today's session is being recorded and it will be available on the Vivid website to all Vivid members, and you will also receive a follow-up email with links to the slide deck as well as the recording. And for some housekeeping on answering questions, you'll see a questions pane in your toolbar for the GoToMeeting on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. Here's a picture of the GoToWebinar control panel. To submit a question, make sure the questions pane is expanded and type in your question and then click to send. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll pass it over to Justin.
Thanks, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Configure Consulting, How to Automate SOX PCI Breach Detection with HP UCMDB-CM webinar. My name is Justin Harrison, and here with me is Brian Wong, Configure Consulting Security Compliance Lead. Today we're going to be talking with you about UCMDB Configuration Manager, how it can be harnessed to automate the process of enforcing, detecting, and remediating compliance breaches. Before we jump into today's agenda, I'd just like to take a minute to tell you a little bit about Configure Consulting. We're an IT consulting firm focused on delivering solutions that optimize IT operations. We work with organizations across North America in a wide range of industries, including financial services, telecom, aviation, manufacturing, healthcare, and the public sector. Today we're going to talk specifically about Configuration Manager. We're going to start the conversation by discussing the requirements around compliance management, zooming specifically on SOX and PCI compliances. We'll also be discussing how configuration management can support and meet all those requirements. HP Configuration Manager is a software add-on. It's entitled to most UCMDB users. It has a tremendous interface to keep track of actions upon configuration breaches, policy changes, and unauthorized change detections. Brian will provide you with an overview of what more specifically CM can do and how it's used across a number of industries, and demonstrate some heavy-hitting examples. During his demonstration, Brian will showcase exactly how all kinds of personas and roles in your organization, including application owners, DBAs, internal auditors, and others, can access CM and use it as a means of unlocking the data that is available in UCMDB. We will not be taking the full hour for the presentation, so please, at the end of the presentation, we'll have a Q&A session. So I encourage you to, again, post any questions that you may have in the question manager on the webinar screen. What makes compliance management an interesting challenge is the fact that IT infrastructure is diverse, dynamic, and complex. It's always changing. There are many different types of assets, many different vendors, and many different functions involved in managing the infrastructure. And the infrastructure is held up against a host of requirements, including baseline configuration policies, global network management policies, standards that may be specific to each data center. In and also the application-specific level. Your critical or your front-end applications may have different requirements than the back-end or low-priority applications. Also, requirements around high availability, geographic redundancy, and, of course, security and compliance. So the reason we have chosen to focus on SOX and PCI in particular is that their requirements are really going to come to all the points you see on the right-hand side. So this discussion will be talking about SOX and PCI. We'll also, by design, be covering a lot of the requirements that your organization may already have from an internal standards and policy management perspective. So today's discussion will be focused on how Configuration Manager can be used to address the compliance challenges mentioned on the previous screen, and also, very importantly, support in extracting additional value from your existing UCMDB. So SOX and PCI, while they're a huge regulatory requirement, are both quite generally geared towards protecting sensitive end-user information. While these requirements are broad, we chose to highlight a couple of elements that are called for on the screen here. Validating that failovers and backups are managed in a separate location are managed for high availability in a big element. Avoiding default administrator accounts on sensitive databases and infrastructure elements and other components is also critical. Enforcing usage of non-standard ports, SOX and PCI both have significant guidelines around the nature of separations between your web servers and the corresponding databases or internal servers. And of course, validating the antivirus is installed and up to date across the environment. Now, as I'm saying this, I'm sure there's a lot of light bulbs going off with UCMDB users on the call here, because you've probably seen a lot of the information in your UCMDB already that validate these requirements. So with that, I'm going to take a quick vote of the audience, if you can use the voting. Raise your hand if one or many of you have struggled to give other stakeholders across the organization visibility in your data in your UCMDB. You can raise your hand by selecting the hand button on the webinar panel. Yeah, just watching.
Justin, I've launched a poll. I've launched a poll that they can participate in too. They just have to vote, and the votes are coming in, and we can share the results. And Evan, you'll want to. You can just won't be able to see the results if you would like to read those, Evan. And I think they're still coming in. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to close it and show the results. All right, Evan, did you want to share the results? Did we lose Evan?
Yeah, I see them on my screen. You can see it really speaks to what we've seen working with all kinds of organizations across the continent.
Right, so 88% said yes. Yeah, and 12% said no. It's great. Okay.
Yeah, that's a major issue across a lot of organizations. A lot of people struggle to address this. I'm going to pass it over to Brian now, and in his overview demonstration, he's going to show a lot of actionable ways you can work with us in resolving those challenges.
Thanks, Justin. Yeah, so just want to touch upon the poll results again, because it did seem like a lot of you did struggle given that visibility into the data that's in UCMDB. And then that's kind of in line with what we've seen with a lot of customers we've worked with who've done a lot of work in the UCMDB. So you've done discovery, you've done application mapping, what's the next step? And a lot of the information that's captured in the UCMDB is pretty valuable to people outside of configuration management. So you want to be able to give that visibility to the teams that are actually managing this data. So today what we want to show you is how you can bring additional value to those existing deployments by leveraging Configuration Manager for compliance management. Before I move on, I also want to highlight that the base functionality of Configuration Manager is a free add-on for existing UCMDB customers. So if you're looking for like an easy way to add value to your deployments, free is always a good way to go. There's going to be some advanced features that require additional licensing, but much of what you're going to see today is going to be available at no additional cost. So on the screen here, we're looking at a diagram that depicts HP's CMS portfolio, CMS being Configuration Management System. So on the left-hand side, you have discovery and federation that's happening in your IT infrastructure, so either with DDM or UD, Universal Discovery, and that in turn populates UCMDB. And inside UCMDB, that's where you keep track of your change history, where you create your views, your application service models, and also where you keep track of some additional key attributes. But today what we're going to focus in on is the CMS, or the CM configuration manual, and those points that you see on the screen right now, we'll kind of go through that as we go along the presentation and also in the demo. But these three pieces comprise the HP CMS portfolio. So what exactly is Configuration Manager and what can it do? As we mentioned, it's a complementary tool to UCMDB and DDM or UD, and it can't really exist without it. But what CM does is it helps you better understand and manage the data that already exists in your UCMDB. CM allows you to establish standards and policies, even if you're not sure what they are or you aren't enforcing them. And then based upon what you find through CM, you're either able to create a new standard policy or even implement enforced ones that you've already adopted, such as the requirements for SOX or PCI. And the idea here is really just to give you some policy level context to your UCMDB data. The CM tool, it's a very graphical tool, and once we get into the presentation, you'll kind of see that. But much of what you need to configure for it, it's going to be already done if you have a mature UCMDB implementation. So in terms of the usability and learning curve, it's not going to be too steep. And just on this slide, what I wanted to show you here is an example of the policy. So on the left-hand side, you can clearly see that we've created a policy. There's a description of it with the type of policy. And then also on the right-hand side, the policy being applied to could be an application or service. And then you can clearly see the components which are compliant or not compliant. Once we get into the demo portion, I'll actually navigate around the interface so you can get a better feel for how it looks. So how can Configuration Manager help with your compliance challenges? So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the slide just to go over a few key points that we've identified. So moving to the first point. So as we saw on the previous slide, by presenting the information in a simplified manner, graphically you're able to see components and quickly identify where the issues are happening. The second point is being able to standardize IT configurations. And the way CM does this is by scanning your environment for common configurations. And why you would want to do this is because based on the principle that CIs serving the same purpose should have the same or similar configurations. Ultimately, what CM is going to do is help you identify those unsupported or outdated configurations, and then help you reduce the number of configurations that you need to manage. And as a byproduct of reducing that amount, you're also going to be reducing the maintenance costs associated with that. And just an example, I'm sure many of you have had sysadmins come to you, like Windows admins or Unix admins. They'll come to you and say, why do I have to manage Windows NT servers? Why do I have to still have to manage Windows 2000 servers? If there's a standard in your environment, a lot less time would be wasted investigating old issues that have been resolved with a standard configuration.
And if I could jump in, I recently completed some work with a healthcare organization, and they had their critical applications supported by a third-party organization. was a managed service type contract and was driven by a certain SLA. And it turned out that none of the SLAs would be applicable unless the supported environment met the configuration spelled out in that SLA. The organization had grown tremendously through mergers and acquisitions, so at the point we came in, it was near impossible for them to know what the configurations were, and all they knew for certain was that they were not in line with the SLAs because they were all different. The configuration manager definitely offered the capability to figure out, hey, what are the different patterns out there? And by utilizing that segmentation analysis, they could address the mess as opposed to going to every individual device and figuring out whether it meets the configuration requirement or not manually. And that approach saved thousands of personnel hours.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just looking around at today's environment, mergers and acquisitions are happening all the time. So how can you ensure that configurations that you're going to be adopting through those mergers and acquisitions are going to comply with your standards? So with CM, you basically have this tool now to basically quickly scan the new environments and make sure they're in line with your current standards. So the next point I want to talk about is the ability to create and enforce policies. So in CM, there's basically two types of policies. You have a baseline policy, and you also have a topology policy. When you're creating a baseline for a device or a service, what you're trying to do is ensure that there is an acceptable level of performance for them. And just to give you an example, take for example, if you have a customer-facing application and the services that support it, you want to ensure that at any given time you can support increased demand. So you may have created a baseline for those services that says it has to have certain level of hardware requirements. So how can you manage that? Are you currently managing that? So with CM, you basically have that ability to manage that. And it's going to be especially important as all of our organizations move to more virtual environments where all your admins have the ability to add or remove device, hardware resources much easier. And also over time, what happens is what we call, I guess, configuration drift. And I think that's just pretty much a fact of life for many organizations. So over time, there's slight variations in how you configure servers or devices. But if you create a baseline, you're making sure that critical applications and services are being monitored against that baseline. So the other type of policy I want to talk about today is topology policies. So I think this is one of the cooler features of CM because it basically allows you to enforce a desired topological configuration. And what this means is being able to identify single points of failures, enforce geographic redundancy, and also maintain architecture resiliency by ensuring that there's proper failovers in place. And just to give you an example, what I'm talking about is, let's take, for example, your J2EE application clusters. You may already have a policy that says they have to have at least 3 or more nodes, and they have to exist in 2 or more data center locations. So how are you currently managing that? Do you have the ability to do that? Later on in my demo, I'll actually show how we can enforce that policy with CM. And the last point I want to make on this slide is, so once you are creating those standards and policies and they're being enforced, what's going to happen is you're going to be able to validate that the changes that occur are complying with those complying with your compliance requirements. And then what eventually is going to happen is you're going to promote a culture at your organization where the changes are going to be driven by those standards and policies, and then reduce the amount of time spent investigating non-standard changes. So one of the difficulties that we've seen with managed compliance requirements is oftentimes breaches go undetected. Breaches are going to happen in every organization. It's going to be the ability to detect them quickly and then react on them. That's key. You don't want it to be when it comes down to audit time, you're finding out that you have all these issues. So by leveraging CM, what you're going to be able to do is detect the breaches faster and also be able to send the notifications out to rectify it quicker and then before an audit occurs. Although today's focus is primarily going to be on CM, I also want to bring attention to HP's Operations Orchestration Tool, or OO, that when you integrate with CM, it kind of gives you that automated features that you're looking for in terms of remediation. So now we've actually come to the demo portion of the webinar. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to demo these 4 use cases that I've listed here on the screen. And these are based on specific requirements around SOX or PCI. I basically created these use cases because we've seen a lot of the customers struggle with these kinds of questions. They're pretty basic in nature, but if you aren't managing them, it's going to become a bigger issue down the line. So for the 4 use cases, as Justin mentioned, how we're going to do them is sort of a day in the life of. So it'll be a day in the life of an application owner, a day in the life of a manager of some sort of service, or anyone that needs to manage compliance requirements. So I'm actually going to switch over to CM now. So here, even before I get started, I'll go back to the main page here of CM just to show you. This is the main screen of CM. I'll just go over some of the key areas with you. So on the left-hand side, you have the ability to create and manage the views that you've already created in UCMDB. You're also able to create new policies through a wizard and also be able to manage existing policies that you have. So there's also the ability to create reports, some pre-built reports that are in there to manage some additional compliance requirements. But for today, what we're going to focus in really is on this section down here on the bottom left, where you're able to manage views that are applicable to yourself. So what I did was I added views that I need to manage or I need to keep track of. And you can kind of see right off the bat, it gives you a snapshot of how compliant you are with certain views. So in my organization, apparently I'm not doing too well based on the numbers we're seeing. So that's why we're going to show some of these use cases. So for the first use case, what I'm going to do is, the way I've set it up is I'm going to be a manager of an online retail application. So I'm in charge of managing this application and all the devices and services that make up this application. So since this website, it also processes credit card payments, the servers are required to be PCI compliant. So I'm going to take a specific PCI requirement that says all PCI servers must use and regularly update antivirus software. So my team actually created a view. It's this view right here. It's called Payment Processing Antivirus. And what this view does is checks to ensure that antivirus software is installed for all those critical devices. So I'm going to click on it. And then right away, we're kind of presented, with that graphical view of my application. You have the different components that make up the application, and also where I'm compliant or not compliant right away. So green meaning compliant, red meaning non-compliant. So in this case, I'm actually interested in the non-compliant items. So one of my servers has a red triangle, so I'm going to click on it. And then down on the left-hand side, you can see, oh, I'm actually in breach of PCI requirement number 5. And the description's over on the right side that says you have to have antivirus software installed. So even just looking at the diagram here, you can see I have 4 servers that make up this application, but only 3 that have antivirus and software installed. So what I did in this case was I actually took it back to the manager who handles antivirus software updates. And then we came to find out that the way servers are configured now, there's a local firewall on them, and it's preventing the automatic install of that. So you can kind of see how we took a simple scenario that probably is pretty common in many organizations and basically shared the information that we have within UCMDB with CM. So for the second use case, I'm going to continue to be that manager of that online retail application. But this time what's happened is I've been sent a report from our internal auditor that says we had guest accounts installed on some of our critical servers. So this specific PCI requirement states that when accessing PCI servers, there should be a unique ID. So you shouldn't have any default guest accounts, admin accounts. Everyone should have a unique ID. So I'm going to click on the view that's applicable in this case, the payment processing servers users, and once again we get that nice view of what makes up the application and also the components which are compliant or not. In this case, I know there's some non-compliant items, so I'm going to click on one of them. Again, I get the details of the policy, a description of it. I'm looking at the view. You can see there was actually a guest account still discovered on it. So I'm going to take the next step and actually try to start the process of getting this remediated. So what we did was we actually created an automation flow, which I can run if I click on this button here called Run Automation. And this is the other tool I was talking about, OO, Operations Orchestration, where you can kind of create that the ability to automate some of the remediation processes. So in this case, we actually created an email notification that's going to be sent out to those that are managing this, the services, and make sure that they're able to rectify the issue. So I'm just going to run it here. And then also, rather than show you how it's supposed to send it to my email address, but I don't want to show you how messy my inbox is, so I'll actually show you the report that says it was sent out. Yeah, so you can kind of see this is the automation flow that said it was successfully sent. So for the third use case, we're going to shift focus now over to SOX compliance. And in this scenario, I'm going to be the manager of database services. So I manage all databases at my company. And recently what happened is we hired some new DBAs. And the new DBAs didn't come from a SOX background, so they're not really familiar with some of the requirements. But I want to make sure that the databases that they've been creating are following our SOX requirements that says they can't be created with the default port. So once again, I'm going to click on the view that's applicable to me in this case, SQL database servers. And you can kind of see that this is a little bit of a different type of policy. In this case, it's a baseline policy. And the baseline for SQL servers states that it shouldn't be a specific port, the default port in this case. So again, I'm able to see the compliant items, the non-compliant items. But this, I'm going to check on this database server here and actually drill down and to see what it was configured with. So I have click on this button here, and I can actually see that the port that is configured with was the default port. And here it matches what we said the baseline is. So I can actually show you an example of a correct one, just for comparison's sake. See this one. This is an existing server that has a non-standard port configured. So once again, what we're trying to show here is, we have this information in UCMDB. Let's share it. Let's get this information out to other teams. Help promote a better culture in our organization where, everyone knows what the process and procedures are. And then the last use case, we're still going to focus on SOX compliance, but now I'm going to be that internal audit. I'm going to be an internal auditor who basically is tasked with periodically checking on critical applications to ensure that there's proper redundancy in place. So this is actually the example which I mentioned previously with our J2EE clusters. So I'm going to click on the view, and I get that nice graphical view of my J2EE services, or the components that make it up. And I can see, compliant, non-compliant items again. I'm just going to click on the first one I see right here. And in this case, there's actually two policies applied to all my J2E services. There's one compliant and one non-compliant. So if I click on the compliant one, I can see, this application has to have three or more nodes. So this is it right here. If I trace it down, I can see 1, 2, and 3 servers. But it's also in breach of another policy, this one that says servers have to exist in 2 more physical locations. So again, if I trace it back, 1, 2, 3, we can actually see that all these servers actually exist only in one location in the Atlanta data center. So what we can do with this information is, maybe there was a valid reason for this. If I take it back to the architecture team, maybe there was a valid reason for only putting that one data center. But we're actually not losing sight of policies that we have in place and making sure that when we do build our infrastructure, that's following the proper procedures. So that actually concludes the demo portion of the webinar. But I just want to highlight how we took some simple scenarios, unassuming scenarios that many organizations could lose sight of. And it could have a bigger impact down the line. When it comes to audits, you have to be following the policies. And sometimes the little ones are the ones that you kind of lose sight of. So I just wanted to show how we did that simply with Configuration Manager. So I'm actually going to switch back to the presentation. So just to recap what we've talked about, I hope what we show you today is that with CM, you have another tool that can help you manage compliance requirements. You get the ability to manage policies through simple views and dashboards. You also get that drill down functionality. You may or may not have a way of managing your policy requirements now, or maybe you do, but there's too many of them, you can't see them simply. So with CM, you get that nice graphical interface. The next point is standardizing and reducing the amount of IT configurations. So being able to understand how many configurations are out there, what kind of configuration you need to manage, and then by doing that process here, you're going to be able to eliminate older standards that you don't need to manage. And then lastly, the last point is improve your IT management processes. So once you're managing through standards and policies, your changes are going to be driven by those requirements. So we just wanted to make sure that you see that there is this tool that's going to help you promote a different culture at your organization that's driven by standards and policies. And there's also a nice diagram. I just wanted to put that in there to show how our J2E app is now actually compliant. So I'm actually going to hand it back to Justin now.
Thanks, Brian. So this time we're going to open the floor to questions and answers. But before I get into that, I want to note at the bottom of the slide, but I don't see, is it the next slide, Brian? Yes, okay.
Yes, yes, sir.
That we have just mine and Brian's information here. So if you have any questions, you feel free to contact us. We'll get to your questions here in a minute, but even after the meeting, just don't hesitate to contact us with any questions. We, even if it's a simple question, we're happy to answer them. And are we heading over to Evan now? Yeah.
Yes, Evan. He's having trouble with his audio. Let's see.
Can you hear me? Oh, that was me.
Evan, yes, we hear you great.
Okay, great. The first and only question I see here is from Jake Berman, asking, there are hundreds of PCI compliance audits. Is there pre-created audits available, or how many have you created in this demonstration?
So, yeah, it's we don't actually have, there's no pre-built compliance requirements within the tool. So from that perspective, it's kind of, I know there's a lot of requirements around PCI, but some of the smaller ones you're able to, apply to many many different services and requirements. It doesn't have to be just PCI. So if you create one policy, a lot of the SOX and PCI requirements are similar in nature in terms of protecting end user requirements. So once you've created one, you can basically apply it to many different areas. But to answer the question, no, there isn't really pre-built ports for SOX or PCI.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Another one just came in. Here, Evan, here's another question.
Oh, there you go. Okay. From John Brooks, can you tell us the HP products that you have deployed?
Are we talking specifically in the demo portion or ones that we worked on?
That's all I've got.
So in this case, what we have in the demo portion is we have UCMDB. We did deploy a probe, but it's not really necessary in this case. It's just taking the data that you have in UCMDB and also OO. So the OO portion is the automating some of the remediation processes. But you also have the ability to create reports in CM that can be automatically sent out as well too. So it can periodically, if you send on a day-to-day basis, it can send once a week. You get those reports that you're able to send out.
But also, do you think maybe it was a question for configure consulting is what we deployed, or us individually with configure consulting?
In the demo, he followed up with it afterwards.
Okay. All right. I didn't see that. Okay.
Anyone else?
I don't see any more questions at this time.
Yeah, so just as Justin mentioned, if there's any follow-on questions that people want to ask about the product or about our demo, our contact information is there. And I think it's going to be posted on the website as well too, right, Stephanie?
Yes, it will be, absolutely, yes.
So feel free to contact us if something wasn't clear or if it requires more explanation. We're happy to answer any questions afterwards.
Well, great. I just wanted to thank Brian and Justin for your presentation today, and thank you, Evan, for the Configuration Management System 6 from Vivid bringing this also, and thank you all for joining us today from wherever you are. Appreciate you coming. And we'll have a great rest of your day or evening. Take care.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.